Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. A few weeks ago, I went outside at around 3 a.m. to move the garbage to the curb. The pickup would be coming later that morning, and I often did this chore in the middle of the night. I tend to keep weird hours, and as the weather warms up for the summer, I find the warm nights preferable to the sweltering days. I was not worried about bothering my neighbors too much, since I didn't use noisy bins, and all the houses directly next to me were currently empty. Actually, I found the quiet of the neighborhood at night to be very relaxing. Unfortunately, since I don't use bins, animals are able to get into the bags a bit easier. While this doesn't happen often, it had happened on this night. I was outside picking up the strewn about garbage and putting it into another bag when the silence of the night was suddenly broken by multiple police sirens. At first, they seemed very distant, and while they startled me, it was not at all unheard of for sirens to sound at night here. Usually, though, it would be quite a distance away. As I listened, still bagging the garbage, I could tell multiple sirens were getting closer to my location. Then, just as suddenly as they'd started, they stopped again. All there was silence. By the time they'd stopped, it sounded like they were 4 or so blocks away. The silence was very intense. I began to haul the bags back to the curb when the neighborhood dogs all started barking at once. It was like every dog in the neighborhood had suddenly gotten the cue to start barking. Many were even howling like crazy. It continued for a minute or so, and once again, it stopped just as suddenly as it had started in the first place. I hadn't realized at first that I hadn't heard any barking or howling while the sirens were going. Normally, that's how it would work, they would start at the same time. But these dogs had started up separately from the sirens and stopped all at once. That was not normal. I went back to the side of the house to grab some more bags when the silence was broken for a third time, a single chime in the night, like someone getting a phone notification. This time, the sound was not blocks away. The sound was right there, right next to me, no more than a foot away. As I said, the area directly around me was supposed to be empty. I was done. The rest of the garbage could wait until morning. I didn't see anyone in the darkness, but that just made it even worse. That meant there was someone nearby and hiding that I couldn't see. I immediately rushed back into the house and left the garbage for the morning. I don't know how these things were related. If the cops had been chasing someone who was fleeing and that caused the dogs to bark afterward, or if someone was playing sounds on their phone as they approached my house. Maybe it was all just a coincidence, but I don't think I'll be taking out the garbage at 3 a.m. anymore. This happened when I was about 11 years old. I'm a girl, by the way. I had a friend who was 12, also a girl, over at my dad's house for the first time, and we were having quite a lot of fun together. My dad went out into the front yard to take a phone call at some point. At this time, it was about 10:30 or so at night. We were both hyped up on Dr. Pepper and Mountain Dew, and we were so hyper that we decided to follow my dad outside. We mainly stayed in the front yard until we decided we wanted to go back inside. My friend and I jumped the back fence because we were right next to it. For some context, I had a pit bull and a large German shepherd who shared the backyard. My friend and I went up to the second floor and were playing with some makeup. About 30 minutes later, we went back downstairs. I could hear my dogs barking and crying like crazy. I decided to let them in the house. The dogs had their own fenced-off area in the backyard to avoid interfering with the garden. My dad hadn't let them back in for the night yet. My friend pointed out that my dad was still on the front porch. I went to the back door to open it, only to jump in surprise when I saw a man crouching by the back gate, staring at my back door. He was next to the side of the gate we had previously jumped over. I asked my friend to stay there and make sure the man stayed in place while I went to check if my dad was still outside. Sure enough, there he was, still on the phone. For whatever reason, I didn't tell my dad about the man in our backyard. Instead, my friend and I watched him out there in terror for about 20 minutes. After those 20 minutes, he moved across the street and crouched behind a car for another 5 minutes, then came back to the gate. I decided it was unsafe for my dogs to still be in the yard, so I turned on the light to see more clearly and opened the dog's gate. After I let my dogs in, the guy was still crouched and not moving a single bit. 10 more minutes passed, which to me felt like 10 hours, and the man was still there. Suddenly, he stood up. After seeing him standing, I realized he was holding something that seemed to be a metal pipe or perhaps a bat. I locked the door, and my friend and I ran across the house to the front door to tell my dad to come back inside. I never gave him an explanation as to why, but I'm guessing he saw the urgency in my face or voice and listened. After that, we didn't see the man again. This might be a little bit long, but it still gives me nightmares. I'm a 21-year-old female. I drive from Miami to Daytona Beach, near Orlando, almost every other week or so. I usually make sure to fuel up before I start off, but this one unfortunate day, I forgot. I left Daytona around 12 a.m., driving back to Miami. I drive a black Mustang 40th anniversary, and I was literally flooring it back home through I-95. The entire route was pretty much empty, other than a few trucks and small cars here and there. I was jamming to some good music, not paying much attention to what was going on with my fuel tank. At around 2:30 or 2:45, though, the low fuel warning popped up. I saw it and started looking for the nearest exit, which happened to be Boynton Beach. I'd never been there before, and I had no idea, and still don't, really, about what the area is like. I took the exit and saw a Circle K just off the exit. I was a little bit relieved, because now, at least, I wouldn't run out of fuel in a place I'd never been to before. With barely enough fuel to spare in my car, I pulled up to this gas station. It was totally empty. I didn't even see a single car inside or outside on the road. There were no other people other than a single tall man wearing a red-colored jacket. He was walking around near the side of the gas station store, where all the parking spots were. He wasn't very close to the pump I was at. I was a little bit unnerved, but I tried to shake off my fear by telling myself it was nothing. The man, at this point, was only looking at the ground, but I could see he was kind of walking in the general direction of my car. I was still inside, contemplating whether I should get out or stay in. Usually, I would have just gotten out and filled up, not being scared at all, but something in my gut was telling me to lock the door right now and wait inside until either the man went away or walked past my car. At this point, the guy was only a few feet away, still not even looking at me. I tried to tell myself, it's okay. He doesn't even care that I'm here. I should just get out and do it. Then, though, my worst fear came to life. The man looked straight up at me and dashed toward the driver's side door. He tried his hardest to yank it open. At this point, it was around 3 a.m. with no other people in the general vicinity. I froze for a moment and thought I was going to die. He pulled on the door handle, desperately trying to force it open. Somehow, I got my senses back. I turned my car back on and floored it. He was holding on so hard, but he didn't even let go of the door handle until I hit the gas pedal. I'm thankful my low-fuel car still started and drove off. I had nothing to defend myself with other than a plastic fork I'd gotten from Panda Express earlier that day. I still can't get over the whole experience. It scares the living daylights out of me. Junior year of high school, my parents got a job offer out of state, so I was forced to move all the way across the country. I started a new school late into the academic year, around mid-March. Because of this, I was having a hard time fitting into the new school. All I wanted was to make a single friend, but I was too shy to talk to much of anyone. This was around the time that my friends left MySpace to join Facebook, so I did the same to keep close to them. Some days later, I received a friend request from David. David was a guy that I had been friends with in my old town. Well, he wasn't exactly a friend, rather a friend of another friend of another friend. My friend Jerry had introduced him to the group and would bring him along every time all of us would hang out together. I knew that David was a year older than us, and he had gone to a different school as well. Other than that, though, none of us really knew a single thing about him. In fact, we always just kind of referred to him as Jerry's friend because he never even bothered to talk to any of us. Obviously, when I received a friend request from him on Facebook, I was more than a little bit confused. He had hardly ever spoken a single word to me when I lived near him, so for him to want to be friends with me after all of this time seemed a little bit strange. I was really lonely, though, and desperate for friends, so I didn't really care. Other than not really being sociable, nothing had ever seemed off about him, at least not at the time. Looking back, I remember that looking through his profile, he seemed to hardly have any pictures or friends when I accepted his request. Like I said, though, this was around the time that people had just started using Facebook, so it didn't seem all that weird for him to have such a barren profile. Over the years, his friend list got a lot bigger, even more so than mine, so I didn't really think anything of it anyway. I digress. I accepted his request. It was like this that David and I became friends. He told me he had just started university and was quite lonely because he was also too shy to make friends in person. I sympathized with him, saying I was having a hard time in my school as well for the exact same reasons, and we started to bond over that. Little by little, we started to talk more and more. He shared his problems with me, and I shared mine with him. When it was time for me to apply to university, he even helped me out. He taught me how to sign up for my SAT and ACT and helped me apply to scholarships. He even paid for one of my application fees using a Visa gift card, so I didn't receive any of his personal information. Then, when I started university, he helped me out with that as well. He told me where to buy books, gave me studying tips, and provided emotional support. So, when he asked for my phone number, I didn't hesitate for a second to give it to him. David was now one of my best friends, and I wanted to keep him close, even if physically we were far away from each other. It was around this time that he began to share more of his life with me. All of it was pretty normal stuff. He had a job at Pizza Hut, which he hated but needed to keep in order to pay his bills. He also played soccer, but not for university or anything, just a group of guys that got together on the weekends to unwind a bit. I think the biggest reveal was that he'd flunked out of university and that I was the only one who knew because he was too embarrassed to tell anyone else. He also said at one point that he had to move back in with his mom, which he seemed to hate a lot. 2, maybe 3 years into our friendship, my family decided to take a trip back to the city where we had lived prior to moving across the country. I excitedly told him and all of my old friends. Most of them were excited about the idea of us all hanging out together again because, after high school, we'd all gone our different ways. When I contacted David, though, he showed very little interest. In fact, he seemed quite opposed to the idea. I thought this was weird. You know, I wasn't just some stranger he had met online, but rather someone who had been close to him for many years. I kept insisting and asking for a reason, and then he finally gave me one. He told me his pictures had been heavily edited and he was afraid of disappointing me if we were to meet in real life. I told him it didn't matter what he looked like. I just wanted to meet him and hang out in person for the first time in a long time, but he still refused to do so. Instead, he started being a massive jerk to me. He knew exactly what buttons to push, all my insecurities and secrets. He started using that knowledge to hurt me badly. So, I stopped talking to him for a while. Some weeks later, I met up with my friends as planned, and much to my surprise, I saw David there looking exactly like he did in all of those pictures. I didn't understand why he'd lied about photoshopping them or why he said he didn't want to meet me, only for him to show up at our friend's house. I was so angry at him that I didn't ask any questions. I kept waiting for an apology, but he refused to approach me. He was treating me like he treated me back when we were in high school. I was getting really upset, but given that he was being such an asshole to me, I figured this was another attempt at getting under my skin. We were all drinking and talking about what we were up to, and when it was his turn to share, he pretty much said all the same things I already knew about him, that he wished he was still in university like the rest of us, but he'd flunked out and was living with his mom. He said he was miserable there and wanted to move out, but his job at Pizza Hut wasn't paying enough for him to do that. At this point, I was pretty pissed off. The alcohol had given me enough courage to finally ask him why he'd been treating me so badly. He apologized and admitted he barely remembered me. Well, obviously, that hurt my feelings badly. I told him about Facebook, about the mean text messages. He just kept insisting he didn't even have a Facebook. Apparently, he used to have a MySpace at some point, but stopped using that when he switched over to Tumblr. A Facebook account was something he'd never even considered making. I asked him about the messages, and he said I'd probably confused him with another David. In fact, he never had my number in the first place. I thought denying it was a lousy excuse, but then Jerry backed him up. The thing was, apparently, David hadn't just been talking to me on Facebook, but a bunch of us. So, when we kept calling him out on this, he told us to text this David guy, and he would prove it was not him. He set his phone down on the table, and I sent him a message, but no matter how long we waited, no new message appeared on his phone. While we were all arguing about how we needed to give it some time, the David I had been talking to for years responded, proving that we had been talking to a fake all along. Things turned pretty awkward at this point. They were all confused, and David was obviously feeling very violated. With all of us wanting answers, we opened our friend's laptop and searched up that profile on Facebook. The first thing David pointed out is that whoever this person was, they were using his mother's maiden name, not his real last name. While most of the people on his friends list were people that he knew in real life, none of them were people he'd actually kept in contact with. His profile picture was a dog he owned years ago, but had long since died. All measures that, looking back, I'm guessing were used by this person to keep David's actual friends from finding him on Facebook. The older pictures had all been copy-pasted from his MySpace, but most of the newer ones had been copied from his Tumblr, which he apparently uploaded to pretty often. The weirdest thing was, as he continued to scroll through this and point out the fakeness to us, he noticed some pictures he swore he had never even seen before, pictures from his soccer games, taken from the audience view, which the fake David had insisted his brother had taken. The real David said his brother never went to a single one of them, nor did any of his family members or friends. Further exploring his own fake profile, David pointed out that while a bunch of his status updates were things that never happened, a lot of them were actually quite accurate and things he'd never shared with anybody. Whoever this person was, they had been watching David for a long time. They knew his schedules. They knew what movies he went to, what ice cream flavors he liked, even his favorite bands. Whoever this was knew every single thing about him. We tried to confront this imposter, but they never answered the messages after, and instead, the profile was deleted before we had the chance to examine any further. We never did get any answers. I don't know why that person pretended to be David for so long, or why they did it in the first place at all. All I know is I felt extremely violated for having shared so many private details of my life with him. I also felt extremely bad for the real David. I wondered for the longest time how this person found him and how they managed to learn every private detail of his life. A few months back, my mother called me up saying she'd found a profile with her name, but with my pictures on it. She thought I'd made a second profile. I didn't tell her the truth because I didn't want to scare her, but the truth is, I hadn't even known it existed. I'd always set my Facebook to private, and I no longer accept random friend requests, nor do I post my pictures anywhere else. This profile only seemed to have old pictures of me from the time when I'd actually been friends with that David's profile account. There wasn't weird stuff like David's soccer game pictures or anything like that, but the account was still active, and it had been for a while. None of the friends were people I actually knew, And the updates were all things that I'd told that fake David I'd been doing in real life. I don't know if the profile belonged to the same person exactly, but I'm extremely average looking, so I don't know why anyone would want to use my pictures when there are way prettier girls online to pretend to be. I'm guessing that it had to be him. I don't know. I just reported the profile, and it now no longer exists. Sometimes I wonder if that person is still pretending to be me, or if they've moved on to pretending to be someone else. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.